My greedy heirs thought they had already won. I didn't argue. I didn't ask questions. I didn't even look surprised when my daughter-in-law placed the documents in front of me and said, in that soft, practiced voice, "This will make everything easier for you." Easier. That word again. I simply nodded and signed. Every page. Every line. Every place they had carefully marked for me. Across the table, my son exhaled slowly, like a man finally relieved of something heavy. He didn't thank me. He didn't hesitate. He just watched. My daughter-in-law, however, couldn't hide it. That small smile. Controlled, polite, but there. The kind of smile that only appears when someone believes the outcome is already decided. When the lawyer began reading the document aloud, everything sounded normal. Professional. Routine. Expected. Until it didn't. He reached one sentence. Just one. And then. He stopped. Not paused. Stopped. Mid-line. The room went completely still. Not quiet in a polite way, but the kind of silence that feels like something has gone wrong. I sat there with my hands folded in my lap. And I watched. What happened next was the moment they realized they had misunderstood everything. "I'm glad you're here. Stay with me until the end. And tell me where you're watching from. I'd like to know how far this story travels." Because what they thought was surrender was never surrender at all. 48 hours earlier, everything had looked normal. At least, if you didn't know what to look for. The morning light came through my kitchen window just like it always had, soft. Familiar, touching the edge of the table where my husband used to sit. I made coffee. 1 cup. I used to make 3. I stood there a moment longer than necessary, listening. The house used to carry sound. Footsteps, voices, doors opening and closing. That morning, there was nothing. Just the clock. Tick, tick, tick. I sat down slowly, wrapping my hands around the mug, letting the warmth settle into my fingers. No one came in. No one said good morning. No one asked if I had slept well. That was the first thing I noticed. Not anger. Not cruelty. Just absence. At first, I told myself it didn't mean anything. People get busy, lives change. But then, I started hearing things. Not directly. Never directly. Voices lowered just enough to sound private, but not enough to disappear. "She can't manage everything anymore. It's too much at her age. We should start planning ahead." Planning ahead. I remember that phrase clearly. I sat there, staring into my coffee as it cooled, listening to my future being discussed. Like I wasn't part of it. A few days later, they came to me together. Not casually. Not one at a time. Together. My son stood near the window, his arms crossed, looking outside instead of at me. My daughter-in-law sat across from me, her posture perfect, her expression calm, controlled. There was a folder on the table. Neatly prepared. Waiting. "We've been talking," she said gently, "and we think it's time to make things easier for you." Easier. I nodded. Of course I did. She opened the folder and turned it toward me. Legal documents. Carefully arranged. Every page marked. "You don't need to worry about the house anymore," she continued, "or the finances. We'll take care of everything." My son finally spoke. "It's for the best, Mom." That was all. No discussion. No questions. Just a decision I hadn't been part of. I looked down at the papers. Then back at them. And in that moment, something inside me became very still. Not hurt. Not angry. Just clear. I had spent a lifetime building everything around me. And now, they were calmly explaining why I no longer needed to be part of it. I reached for the pen. My daughter-in-law's eyes followed immediately. That small smile returned. Expectation. Certainty. I signed. 1 page. Then another. Then another. No hesitation. No questions. When I finished, I placed the pen down carefully and folded my hands in my lap. "I trust you," I said. My son looked at me then. Relief, immediate. My daughter-in-law closed the folder with quiet satisfaction. They thought it was over. They thought everything had gone exactly as planned. But they never asked one important question. Not once. They never asked what they hadn't been given. And that was their first mistake. The house felt different after they left that day. Not empty. Not quiet. Just settled in a way I hadn't felt before. I moved through it slowly. The same way I always had. My hand brushing lightly against the edge of the table. The back of a chair. The wall near the hallway where a picture frame had hung for years. Nothing had changed. And yet, everything had. I set my purse down by the door and stood there for a moment. Listening. No footsteps. No voices. No sign that anyone had been there since I left. They hadn't come back. Not to check the documents, not to ask if I had questions, not even to make sure I understood what I had signed. That told me more than anything they had said. They were certain. Certain that it was done. I walked into the kitchen and poured myself another cup of coffee. Even though I hadn't finished the first one from earlier. It had gone cold. I didn't throw it away. I just left it there. Some habits take time to break. I sat down at the table, the same seat I had always taken, and wrapped my hands around the new cup. The warmth felt real. Grounding. Outside, the afternoon moved slowly. A car passed. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked once, then stopped. Inside, there was only the clock. Tick, tick, tick. I didn't turn on the television. I didn't reach for my phone. I let the silence stay. There's a difference between being alone and being removed. I had felt alone before. After my husband passed, the house had been quiet in a way that felt heavy but honest. It was grief. It had a place, a reason. This felt different. This felt arranged. Like something had been decided around me. Without me. I thought about the way they had spoken. Not what they said, but how they said it. The softness in her voice. The careful wording. The way she never rushed. Never pushed. Just guided the conversation exactly where she wanted it to go. And my son. He didn't argue. He didn't hesitate. He just agreed. That part stayed with me longer than anything else. Not anger. Not betrayal. Just agreement. I stood up slowly and walked into the living room. The light had shifted slightly, stretching longer across the floor now, touching the edge of the rug where my husband used to rest his feet in the evenings. I paused there. Just for a moment. Memories have a way of stepping in when the present gets too quiet. I could still see him sitting there, reading, occasionally glancing up at me like we shared something unspoken. Something steady. Something that didn't need explaining. I let that image sit. Then I let it go. This wasn't about what had been. It was about what had just happened. I moved toward the hallway and stopped at the small table where we used to keep incoming mail. There was a stack there now. Neat. Untouched. I picked it up and flipped through it slowly. Bills. Advertisements. A letter I didn't recognize. Everything looked normal. Too normal. People who plan things like this don't leave chaos behind. They leave order. Clean lines. Clear paths. No loose ends. Just like the folder they had placed in front of me. I set the mail back down exactly as I found it and continued down the hall. The house was quiet, but not uncertain anymore. Clear. That was the word. Clear. I knew what they believed. I knew what they expected. And more importantly, I knew what they hadn't considered. I stopped in front of the study door. I hadn't opened it in a while. Not because I couldn't. Because I didn't need to. My husband had always kept things organized in there. Structured, labeled, thought through in ways most people never bothered to. He used to say that real control wasn't about what people could see. It was about what they didn't think to look for. At the time, I had smiled and let him handle it. Now, I understood. I opened the door slowly. The room smelled the same. Paper, wood, time. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, cutting across the desk in narrow lines. Nothing had been touched. Nothing had been moved. Exactly as he left it. Exactly as I remembered. I stepped inside and closed the door gently behind me. Not fully. Just enough. My hand rested on the back of the chair for a moment before I moved toward the cabinet in the corner. The metal handle felt cool against my fingers. I opened it. Inside, everything was in place. Folders. Labels. Dates. Order. Not just paperwork. Preparation. I didn't rush. I didn't search. I knew where to look. I pulled out one folder, then another, placing them carefully on the desk. My movements were steady. Measured. Because this part Wasn't new. It had always been here. I opened the first folder and scanned the contents. Legal language. Signatures. Names. Some familiar. Some not. That was enough. I didn't need to read everything. Not yet. I just needed to confirm what I already felt. There were layers. More than they had seen. More than they had asked about. I closed the folder and rested my hand on top of it. They believed they had taken control. That by having me sign those papers, everything had shifted. Transferred. Finalized. But control doesn't move that easily. Not when it's built properly. Not when it's designed to hold. I placed the folders back exactly where they had been. No gaps. No signs. Nothing disturbed. Then I closed the cabinet and stepped back. The room returned to stillness immediately. As if nothing had happened. I stood there for a moment longer, listening. The house was quiet. But it no longer felt empty. It felt patient. I walked out of the study and left the door slightly open behind me. Back in the hallway, the light had shifted again. The afternoon moving forward. Steady. Predictable. Just like they thought everything else was. I returned to the kitchen and sat down. This time, I didn't drink the coffee right away. I just held it. Warm. Steady. And for the first time since they placed those papers in front of me, I allowed myself a single, quiet thought. They were right about one thing. Things were about to get much easier. Just not for them. The next morning, I didn't go back into the study. I didn't need to. Once you've seen enough, you stop searching. You start remembering. I moved through the house the same way I always had. I made my coffee, opened the curtains, watered the small plant by the window that had outlived everything else. Routine matters. It keeps things looking normal. And right now, normal was exactly what I needed them to believe. I didn't call anyone. I didn't reread the documents. I didn't react. Because the moment you react, people adjust. And I wasn't interested in giving them that advantage. It was just afternoon when the doorbell rang. I didn't hurry. I never do. I walked to the door at the same steady pace and opened it. My daughter-in-law stood there. Perfect as always. Hair in place, clothes pressed, expression carefully arranged somewhere between concern and control. "Hi," she said softly, "I just wanted to check on you." Check on me. I stepped aside and let her in without a word. She walked through the house slowly. Not looking, but noticing. There's a difference. Her eyes moved across the furniture. The walls. The small details that hadn't changed. Everything was still exactly where it should be. That seemed to settle her. "Did you rest?" she asked, setting her bag down neatly. "I did," I said. My voice was calm. Even. Exactly what she expected. She smiled slightly and sat down at the table. I poured her a cup of coffee without asking. People like her notice things like that. Control, but polite. "Thank you," she said. She took a small sip, then placed the cup down carefully, aligning it with the edge of the table. That detail didn't escape me. People who need control show it in small movements. "I spoke to the lawyer this morning," she said. Of course she did. "He's finalizing everything. It should all be processed very soon." Very soon. I sat down across from her and folded my hands in my lap. "And your son," she added. Softer now. "He feels much better about all of this." He was worried. Worried. I looked at her for just a second longer than usual. Not enough to challenge. Just enough to register. "I'm sure he was," I said. There was a pause. Not awkward. Just empty enough for truth to slip in. She leaned forward slightly. "There may be a few additional documents," she said. "Just formalities. Nothing complicated." "Formalities." I nodded. "Of course." Relief. Quick, subtle, but there. She hadn't expected resistance. But she had been prepared for it. Which meant they weren't completely certain. Not yet. She stayed for another 10 minutes. Small talk. Careful words. Quiet observation disguised as concern. She wasn't there to visit. She was there to confirm. To make sure nothing had changed. To make sure I hadn't. When she stood to leave, she paused at the door. "We'll schedule the final meeting soon," she said, "just to formalize everything." Formalize. Another soft word. Another clean ending. I nodded. I'll be ready. She smiled again. That same controlled smile. But this time, there was something beneath it. Expectation. After she left, I closed the door and stood there for a moment. The house settled again. Quiet. Still. But no longer uncertain. Clear. I walked back into the kitchen and picked up her cup, rinsing it slowly under the water. She had come to check. Not on me. On the situation. On the outcome she believed was already secured. I dried the cup and set it back exactly where it belonged. Then I stood there, thinking. There's a moment when everything becomes obvious. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just quietly. You begin to see the pattern. The timing of conversations, the softness of words, the certainty behind their actions. This wasn't new. This had been planned. For a long time. I walked to the drawer near the stove and opened it. Inside, under a stack of old receipts, was a small piece of paper. A number. I hadn't used it in years. Not because I forgot. Because I was waiting. I picked up the phone and dialed. Slowly. Listening to each ring. Once. Twice. 3 times. Then. Daniel Carter. A voice answered. Calm. Professional. Familiar. I didn't speak right away. I let the silence sit. Then I said. It's been a long time. There was a pause. Then recognition. Mrs. Henderson? Yes. Another pause. Not confusion. Understanding. What can I do for you? He asked. I looked out the window as I answered. I need you to review something, I said. And then. I let the words settle. I need you to prepare. For what? He asked. I didn't rush. I didn't explain. I just said. For a correction. The word stayed in the air. Simple. Precise. Final. After I hung up, I didn't move right away. I stood there, holding the phone just a moment longer than necessary. Not because I was unsure. Because I wasn't. They thought everything had already been decided. That I had stepped aside. That the outcome was fixed. But they had made one mistake. They assumed I had stopped paying attention. And that was when people usually lose everything. Daniel didn't ask me to come in right away. That was the first thing I noticed after the call. Most people, when they sense something important, try to move quickly. They rush to meet, to talk, to act. Daniel didn't. Tomorrow morning, he had said, bring everything. No urgency in his voice. Just precision. That told me something. He already understood the situation, more than I had explained. That night, I didn't open the folders again. I didn't go back into the study. I didn't reread a single page. Because this wasn't about information anymore. It was about structure. And structure doesn't change overnight. I sat in the living room with the lights low, my hands resting loosely in my lap, listening to the quiet settle around me. There's a difference between not knowing and choosing not to react. 2 days ago, I had been part of a conversation I wasn't included in. Now, I was outside of it entirely. And that gave me something they didn't have. Perspective. I thought about the way my husband used to handle things. He never rushed decisions. Never reacted emotionally. He would sit, listen, let people speak. And then later, much later, he would act. Quietly. Decisively. Without warning. At the time, I used to think he was being cautious. Now I understood. He was being exact. The next morning, I left the house just after 8. Same coat. Same shoes. Nothing that stood out. Routine matters. People notice change more than they notice patterns. Daniel's office hadn't changed. Same building, same glass doors, same quiet lobby with polished floors that reflected more than they showed. The receptionist looked up as I entered. Good morning. Good morning. I gave my name. She nodded immediately. He's expecting you. Of course he was. When I stepped into his office, he was already standing. Not pacing. Not distracted. Just ready. Mrs. Henderson, he said. Daniel. We didn't shake hands. We didn't need to. He closed the door behind me and gestured to the chair across from his desk. No interruptions. No small talk. I placed my bag on the table and took out the documents. The ones they had given me. The ones I had signed. Every page. Every detail. He didn't touch them right away. He looked at them. Then at me. Start from the beginning, he said. So I did. Not emotionally. Not dramatically. Just, clearly. I told him about the conversation. The tone. The words they chose. The way my daughter-in-law led without pushing. The way my son agreed without looking at me. The timing. The certainty. And when I finished, the room went quiet. Daniel reached for the first document and began to read. Slowly. Carefully. Page by page. No interruptions. No reactions. Just attention. Minutes passed. Then more. I didn't move. I didn't speak. Because this part wasn't about me anymore. Finally, he set the papers down. And something in his expression shifted. Not shock. Not concern. Recognition. They moved quickly, he said. Yes. And they expected you to sign without review. Yes. He leaned back slightly. And you did. I met his eyes. Yes. There was a pause. Then he asked the only question that mattered. Why? I let the silence sit for a moment. Not because I didn't have an answer. Because I wanted him to understand the right one. Because I needed them to believe it was over. I said. Something settled in his expression then. Not surprise. Understanding. He picked up the document again and flipped to a section near the middle. They transferred operational control, he said, accounts, property, authority over visible assets. I nodded. What they think they've taken. He looked at me directly. Yes. He turned another page. And this, he said, tapping lightly, is where they believe it's secured. I leaned forward slightly. And is it? He held my gaze for a moment. Then said, simply, no. The word didn't surprise me. But it confirmed something deeper. They had acted with confidence. But not with knowledge. Daniel closed the folder and rested his hand on top of it. They missed something, he said. I didn't ask what. Not yet. Because I already knew. This wasn't the kind of answer you rush. Instead, I asked a different question. What do you need from me? He didn't hesitate. Everything connected to the original structure. He said, anything your husband set up. Anything that wasn't part of what they showed you. I nodded slowly. There's more, I said. He watched me carefully. I thought there might be. Another pause. Then he said quietly. Tell me about the trust. And just like that, the situation changed. Not emotionally. Structurally. We weren't reacting anymore. We were identifying. Tracing. Rebuilding the full picture, from the parts they never thought to look for. Because the mistake they made was assuming what they could see was everything. And it never is. Daniel didn't respond immediately when I mentioned the trust. He didn't nod. He didn't interrupt. He just reached for a different folder, the one I had placed slightly apart from the others, and opened it with a kind of quiet care that told me he already suspected what he might find. Start from the beginning, he said. My husband never liked loose ends. I said. He believed in structure. Daniel turned the first page slowly. That sounds right, he said. It was his idea, I continued, not just to protect what we had, but to control how it would be handled after. Daniel didn't look up. And who controls it now? He asked. I met his eyes. I do. That was the first real shift. Not in me. In him. He leaned back slightly, studying me more carefully now. Primary control? He asked. Yes. Full authority? Yes. And they don't know that. It wasn't a question. No, I said, they don't. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was precise. Daniel leaned forward again, his attention sharper now. They transferred visible assets, he said, property, accounts they're aware of, day-to-day control. I nodded. What they think matters. He allowed a faint, almost imperceptible smile. Yes. He turned another page. But this, he said quietly, tapping the document, this is where the real structure is. I didn't move. The trust, he continued, holds the actual authority, not just ownership, but conditions. That word stayed with me. Conditions. Explain, I said. Daniel looked at me directly. Your husband didn't just set this up to distribute assets. He said, he built it to respond to behavior. I thought about that. Not money. Not control. Behavior. There are clauses, Daniel continued, that activate under specific circumstances. Not obvious ones. Not things people look for. What kind of circumstances? I asked. He paused for just a second. Coercion, he said. Undue influence, manipulation. The room went completely still. I didn't think about the documents. I thought about the conversation. The tone. The way the folder had been placed in front of me. The way the words had been chosen. This will make things easier. You don't need to worry anymore. It's for your own good. I hadn't argued. I hadn't resisted. But that didn't mean there hadn't been pressure. Daniel saw it settle in. That qualifies, he said quietly. I didn't feel relief. I didn't feel anger. I felt alignment. What happens when those conditions are triggered? I asked. Daniel closed the folder slowly. Control reverts, he said, automatically. To me? Yes. And to anyone else protected under the trust. I didn't ask who that was. Not yet. Daniel stood up and walked toward the window, his hands resting lightly against the desk behind him. They assumed this was a standard transfer, he said, a simple shift of control. They assumed a lot of things, I replied. He gave a slight nod. Yes, they did. He turned back toward me. The important thing now is timing. I didn't need him to explain. I already understood. If we act too soon, he said, they'll adjust, they'll try to protect themselves, maybe even challenge the structure. And if we wait? I asked. They continue, he said, they reinforce the pattern. Pattern. That word mattered. I sat there, letting it settle. This wasn't about stopping them. It was about allowing them to keep going. To speak the way they had been speaking. To act the way they had been acting. Until it became undeniable. I don't need to confront them, I said. No, Daniel replied, you don't. Another pause. Then. I don't need to explain anything either. He shook his head slightly. No. He picked up the folder again. When the time comes, he said, we let the document speak. That was exactly what I wanted. No arguments. No raised voices. No explanations they could twist or deny. Just clarity. I gathered the papers slowly, placing them back into my bag with the same care I had used when bringing them in. Nothing rushed. Nothing uncertain. At the door, I paused. They think I've stepped aside, I said. Daniel looked at me. Good, he replied. I left the office without looking back. Outside, the world moved the way it always did. Cars passing. People walking. Everything steady. Predictable. When I got home, the house felt the same as before. Quiet. Still. But no longer uncertain. I set my bag down and walked into the kitchen. This time, I didn't make coffee. I poured a glass of water and stood there, looking out the window. They were moving forward. Confident. Certain that everything had already been decided. And for now, I was going to let them believe that. Because the truth wasn't something I needed to announce. It was something they were going to discover. At exactly the right moment. I didn't call Daniel again after that meeting. I didn't need to. Once something is set correctly, you don't keep touching it. You let it unfold the way it was designed to. Instead, I went back to my routine. The same kitchen, the same chair, the same quiet mornings. Because the most important part now was consistency. They came back 2 days later. Not separately. Together. I heard the car first, the familiar sound of my son's engine pulling into the driveway. It stopped closer to the house than usual. Confident. Certain. I didn't look out the window. I didn't need to. The doorbell rang. Once. Then again. Not impatient. Just expected. I walked to the door at the same steady pace and opened it. My son stood there. Behind him, my daughter-in-law. Both composed, both prepared. Hi, Mom, he said. His voice was softer than usual. Careful. I stepped aside and let them in without a word. They moved through the house like they had the right to. Not openly. But naturally. The way people do when they already believe something belongs to them. My daughter-in-law's eyes moved across the room, small details. Quick confirmations. Nothing had changed. Everything was exactly where they expected it to be. That seemed to relax her. We sat in the living room. My son took the chair across from me. She sat slightly forward, angled just enough to guide the conversation without appearing to. She always did that. Even in silence, she directed. How have you been? She asked. Fine, I said. Short answers leave space. And people tend to fill space with what they really came to say. We met with the lawyer again, my son said after a moment. I nodded. I assumed you would. He hesitated for just a second before continuing. Everything is moving forward, the transfers, the accounts, all of it is being finalized. All of it, I repeated. He didn't notice. But she did. A flicker in her eyes. Quick. Controlled. There are just a few final confirmations. She added smoothly. Standard process. Nothing complicated. Of course. There are always final confirmations. I folded my hands in my lap. What kind? Access alignment, she said, making sure everything is properly transitioned so there are no delays later. Later. That word again. I nodded slowly. That makes sense. Relief passed between them. Subtle. But real. They had expected hesitation. Maybe even resistance. But not this. My son leaned forward slightly. You don't have to worry about anything anymore, he said. We've taken care of it. I looked at him then. Really looked. At the way he avoided holding my gaze. At the way his voice carried certainty, but not warmth. At the way he said we. As if that word had replaced something else entirely. I know, I said. Something in his expression shifted. Briefly. Not guilt. Not quite. Something closer to discomfort. But it passed. They stayed for about 20 minutes. 20 minutes of careful conversation. Measured words. Controlled pauses. They weren't there to visit. They were there to confirm. To make sure nothing had changed. To make sure I hadn't. Before they left, my daughter-in-law paused at the door. We'll set a final meeting with the lawyer, she said, just to formalize everything. Formalize. Such a clean word. I nodded. I'll be there. She smiled. That same controlled smile. But now. There was something else beneath it. Impatience. After they left, I closed the door gently and stood there for a moment. The house settled again. Quiet. Still. But now. Completely clear. They were moving faster. Which meant they were getting closer. Closer to the point where everything becomes irreversible. I walked back into the living room and sat down in the same chair. Same position. Same stillness. But something inside me had shifted. Not emotionally. Strategically. They believed they were tightening control. Finalizing the process. Securing everything before anything could go wrong. But what they didn't understand was that every step they took now wasn't protecting them. It was defining them. That evening, my phone rang. I didn't check the number. I already knew. Mrs. Henderson, Daniel said. Yes. I've completed the initial review. I didn't ask what he found. I waited. There are more layers than they realized. He said, your husband was thorough. Yes, I said quietly. He always was. A brief pause. Then. They've already triggered one condition. I didn't react. I didn't speak. I just listened. Not enough to activate everything, he continued, but enough to establish a pattern. Pattern. That word again. What do you need from me? I asked. Nothing yet, he said, just time. Time. I looked around the room. At the photographs. At the quiet. At the life they believed they had already taken control of. You have it, I said. After the call ended, I didn't move right away. I let the silence return. But it felt different now. Not empty. Not waiting. Certain. They thought they were finishing something. But in reality, they had only just begun. And this time, I wasn't watching anymore. I was counting. The next few days passed quietly. Too quietly. Not the kind of quiet that feels peaceful, but the kind that settles in when everything has already been decided, just not revealed yet. I didn't call Daniel. He didn't call me. That was intentional. When something is being built carefully, you don't keep checking on it. You don't disturb it. You let it take shape. I stayed in my routine. Morning coffee curtains opened the same chair by the window. From the outside, nothing had changed. And that was exactly what I needed. Because people don't question what looks familiar. They relax. They assume. On the third day, the call came. Not from Daniel. From my son. I let it ring once. Twice. Then I answered. Mom, he said, his voice lighter than usual. We've scheduled the final meeting. Of course they had. When? I asked. Tomorrow afternoon, he said, at the lawyer's office, just to finalize everything. Finalize. Such a confident word. I looked out the window as I responded. I'll be there. There was a brief pause. Not long. Just enough to reveal something underneath. Good, he said, it's the right thing. The right thing. I didn't correct him. I know, I said. After the call ended, I placed the phone down carefully and stood there for a moment. Not thinking. Not questioning. Just aligning. Tomorrow. They believed tomorrow was the end. The final step. The moment everything became official. But in reality, it was the moment everything would be revealed. That evening, I didn't do anything different. No preparation. No reviewing documents. No rehearsing. Because this wasn't something I needed to prepare for. It was something they had already prepared for themselves. The next day, I arrived early. I always do. The lawyer's office looked exactly the same as before. Clean. Quiet. Controlled. The receptionist greeted me politely and asked me to wait. I sat down in the same chair as last time. Hands folded. Back straight. Still. They arrived together. Again. My son first. My daughter-in-law just behind him. They looked confident. More than before. Relaxed. Like people who had already secured what they came for. Hi, Mom, he said. I nodded. She smiled. That same smile. Only now, it wasn't controlled anymore. It was certain. We didn't talk much. There was no need. They believed everything had already been handled. This was just formality. The lawyer entered a few minutes later. Different from Daniel. Younger. Efficient. Unaware. He greeted everyone and took his seat. Thank you for coming, he said. We'll go through the final document and confirm all terms. Confirm. I almost smiled. He began reading. Page 1. Standard language. Transfers. Authority. Everything exactly as they expected. My son leaned back slightly. Relaxed. My daughter-in-law sat still, but I could see it. The satisfaction. The quiet confidence of someone who believes they've already won. The lawyer turned the page. Continued reading. Nothing unusual. Nothing unexpected. And then. He reached it. It wasn't dramatic. There was no warning. No shift in tone. Just a sentence. He stopped. Not paused. Stopped. The room changed instantly. Not loudly. Not visibly. But completely. His eyes moved across the line again. Slower this time. More carefully. My son noticed first. What is it? He asked. No answer. My daughter-in-law leaned slightly forward. What does it say? She asked. Still no answer. The lawyer adjusted his glasses. Looked down again. Then up. Not at them. At me. And in that moment, everything became clear. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I didn't react. Because this was the moment I had been waiting for. The lawyer cleared his throat. There's a clause here, he said slowly. A pause. It states that any transfer of control made under pressure, influence, or coercion. He stopped again. The room went completely silent. Is subject to immediate review and reversal under the original trust structure. No one spoke. My son's expression shifted first. Confusion. Then something else. My daughter-in-law didn't move. But her eyes changed. I sat there, hands folded in my lap. Exactly the same as before. Because the truth is, nothing had changed. They had just finally seen it. And this time, there was no way for them to unsee it. The lawyer didn't continue reading right away. He stayed on that sentence. Eyes fixed. As if reading it again would somehow change it. It didn't. My son shifted in his seat. What does that mean? He asked. His voice was still controlled, but thinner now. Less certain. The lawyer adjusted the papers in his hands. It means, he began carefully, that if any transfer of control was made under pressure, influence, or coercion. He glanced down again. The original structure has the authority to override that transfer. Silence. My daughter-in-law leaned forward slightly. That doesn't apply here, she said quickly. Too quickly. This was a voluntary decision. The lawyer didn't respond immediately. That was the moment everything started to change. Not the clause. Not the document. Them. He looked at her. Then at my son. Then, back at me. I'll need to review the full trust agreement to confirm how this clause is enforced. He said. Review. Confirm. Words that sounded neutral. Safe. But they weren't. Because for the first time, they weren't in control of the conversation anymore. My son turned toward me. Mom, he said, trying to steady his voice. You understood what you were signing, right? I looked at him. Not long. Just enough. Yes, I said. That answer didn't help him. It made it worse. My daughter-in-law straightened in her chair. There was no pressure, she said. We explained everything clearly. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Because this wasn't about what they said. It was about what could be proven. The lawyer flipped through the pages again. Slower this time. More carefully. Looking for something he hadn't needed to look for before. And that was the shift. Before, he had been reading. Now, he was examining. I'm going to pause here, he said finally. There are additional documents that need to be reviewed before we proceed. Pause. Another clean word. But it didn't feel clean anymore. My son leaned back, running a hand across his face. This is just a formality, right? He asked. The lawyer didn't answer right away. He looked down at the page again. Then said, I can't say that yet. That was the moment the confidence started to crack. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But enough. My daughter-in-law didn't speak. She just sat there, completely still. Too still. People like her don't panic openly. They calculate. Adjust. Reassess. I could see it happening. In real time. She was replaying everything. The conversation. The documents. The timing. Looking for where it had gone wrong. She wouldn't find it. Because nothing had gone wrong. Everything had gone exactly the way it needed to. The lawyer gathered the papers and placed them neatly back on the table. I'll need to consult with another attorney on this, he said, and review the original trust in full. Another attorney. That mattered. Because now, this wasn't just a transaction. It was a situation. My son stood up first. Not abruptly. But not comfortably either. We'll sort this out, he said. He wasn't speaking to me. He was speaking to the room. To himself. My daughter-in-law stood more slowly. Composed. Controlled. But something had shifted behind her eyes. Not fear. Not yet. But uncertainty. She turned toward me. For now, she said, her voice steady, nothing changes. I held her gaze. Calm. Still. No, I said quietly. It doesn't. But we both knew. That wasn't true. Because something had already changed. Not the documents. Not the structure. Their certainty. We left the office separately. No conversation. No eye contact. Outside, the air felt different. Not lighter. Not heavier. Just clearer. I walked to my car slowly. My steps steady, measured. I didn't rush. There was no reason to. Behind me, I could hear their voices. Low. Tense. Trying to piece something together that no longer fit. I didn't turn around. Because this wasn't the moment for confrontation. It was the moment for realization. And realization takes time. When I got home, the house greeted me the same way it always had. Quiet. Still. Unchanged. I set my keys down and walked into the living room, sitting in the same chair as before. Same position. Same stillness. But everything was different now. They had seen it. Not fully. Not completely. But enough. And once someone sees even a part of the truth, they can't go back to what they believed before. I leaned back slightly, letting the silence settle around me. They thought they were finishing something. But what they didn't understand was that they had just opened something. And this time, it wasn't under their control anymore. They didn't call that night. Not my son, not my daughter-in-law. And that told me everything. People who are confident speak quickly. They explain, they reassure, they try to keep control of the narrative. But people who are uncertain, they go quiet. The house settled into its usual stillness. But it felt different now. Not empty. Not patient. Just aware. I didn't turn on the lights right away. I sat in the living room as the daylight faded, the outlines of familiar things slowly softening into shadow. The same chair. The same table. The same life they thought they had already taken from me. I let the silence stretch. Because silence reveals more than words ever do. The next morning, I didn't wait. I called Daniel. He answered on the second ring. Mrs. Henderson. Yes. I assume you've had your meeting, he said. I have. A brief pause. Then. And? I didn't rush. They've seen the clause, I said. Another pause. Longer this time. Not confusion. Recognition. Then it started, he said. Started. Not finished. Yes, I replied. I could hear him shifting papers on the other end of the line. Measured. Focused. They'll react in one of two ways, he said. They'll either try to move quickly, or they'll try to control the damage. I looked out the window. The street was quiet. Predictable. They won't move quickly, I said. He didn't argue. Why? He asked. Because they don't understand what they're dealing with yet, I said. That was the truth. They had seen something. But not enough to act. Not enough to panic. Not yet. They'll try to contain it, I continued. Keep everything in place. Maintain control while they figure it out. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then. That gives us time. Time. That word again. What do we do with it? I asked. We document everything, he said. Every interaction, every statement, every attempt to reinforce their position. Pattern. Again. I nodded, even though he couldn't see it. They've already started, I said. I know, he replied. Another pause. Then. I'll begin the formal review of the trust, he said. Once that's complete, we can move forward. Forward. On our terms, I said. Yes. I ended the call and set the phone down carefully. They thought they had time. They thought this was a delay. A complication. Something that could be managed. But what they didn't understand was that time was the one thing they had just lost control of. Later that afternoon, my phone rang again. This time, I looked at the screen. My son. I let it ring once. Twice. Then I answered. Mom, he said quickly, we need to talk. Not can we talk. Not are you available. We need to talk. I'm listening, I said. There was a pause. Short. Tight. That clause, he began. The lawyer said it might complicate things. Might. Yes, I said. We just want to make sure everything is clear, he continued, that there's no misunderstanding. Misunderstanding. I said nothing. Because people explain more when you don't interrupt. There was no pressure, he added. You agreed to everything. Agreed. Yes, I said. Another pause. Longer now. But if there's anything that needs to be clarified, he said carefully, we can handle that, together. Together. I almost smiled. I'm sure you can, I said. That wasn't what he expected. Silence. Then. We're meeting with the lawyer again tomorrow, he said. You should be there. Should. I will be, I said. He exhaled quietly. Relief. Or something close to it. Good, he said. We'll sort this out. Sort this out. Yes, I said. We ended the call. I set the phone down and stood there for a moment. They were adjusting. Carefully. Slowly. Trying to regain control. But control, once questioned, never returns the same way. I walked into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. The light outside had shifted again. Later in the day now. Longer shadows. Everything moving forward. Just like they thought. But now. They were moving without certainty. And that was where the balance changed. Because the moment someone starts questioning their position, they stop controlling it. They react. And once people start reacting, they begin to reveal everything. I took a slow sip of water and set the glass down. Tomorrow, we would meet again. They believed it was another step toward resolution. But I knew better. It wasn't resolution. It was exposure. And this time, they wouldn't just see the clause. They would understand it. The next day, I arrived exactly on time. Not early. Not late. Right on time. Because timing matters more than people think. The same office. The same hallway. The same quiet air that carried more tension than it should have. This time, they were already there. My son stood near the window, his back half turned, his posture tighter than before. My daughter-in-law sat at the table, papers already spread in front of her. Prepared. But not relaxed. They both looked up when I entered. "Mom," my son said. I nodded. Nothing more. I took my seat. Same chair. Same position. Hands folded in my lap. Still. The lawyer entered a moment later. Not the same one from before. Older. More measured. He didn't smile. He didn't waste time. "Thank you all for coming," he said, taking his seat. His tone was neutral. But his eyes were not. He had already read everything. That was clear. "We've reviewed the document in question," he continued, "as well as the original trust structure." Trust. The word landed differently this time. Heavier. More precise. My daughter-in-law leaned forward slightly. "Yes," she said, "we just want to clarify that everything was signed willingly." Willingly. The lawyer didn't respond to her immediately. Instead, he turned a page. Slowly. Deliberately. "The clause in question," he said, "is not based on whether a signature was given." Silence. "It is based on the conditions under which that signature was obtained." No one moved. My son shifted slightly in his chair. "What does that mean exactly?" he asked. The lawyer looked at him directly. "It means," he said, "that even if your mother signed the documents, if there is evidence of influence, pressure, or manipulation." He paused. "The transfer is not valid under the trust." Not valid. The words didn't echo. They settled. My daughter-in-law's posture changed. Not dramatically. But enough. "There was no manipulation," she said. Her voice was steady. Controlled. But sharper now. The lawyer nodded slightly. "That will be part of the review." Review. Not acceptance. Not agreement. Review. My son leaned forward. "We explained everything clearly," he said. "She understood what she was signing." Understood. I said nothing. Because this wasn't about what I understood. It was about what they had done. The lawyer turned another page. "There are also additional provisions," he said, "regarding beneficiary protection and behavioral triggers." Behavioral. That word again. My daughter-in-law didn't speak this time. But her eyes moved. Quickly. Calculating. "What kind of triggers?" my son asked. The lawyer looked down at the document. Then back up. "Actions that indicate an attempt to gain control through indirect pressure," he said. "Repeated efforts to influence financial decisions. Coordinated discussions that exclude the primary holder." Coordinated. That word stayed in the air longer than the others. Because it fit. Too well. "No one excluded anyone," my daughter-in-law said. Too fast. The lawyer didn't react. He simply continued. "These clauses don't require intent to harm," he said, "only a pattern of behavior that meets the defined conditions." Pattern. Everything came back to that. My son leaned back again. This time slower. Less certain. "So what happens now?" he asked. The lawyer closed the folder. Gently. "Now," he said, "we determine whether those conditions have been met." Determine. Not assume. Not ignore. Determine. "And if they have?" my son asked. The lawyer looked at him. Then at me. Then back at the document. "Control reverts," he said. Silence. Not confusion. Not shock. Understanding. Slow. Heavy. My daughter-in-law didn't move. But her hands tightened slightly against the table. My son looked at her. Then at me. For the first time. He didn't speak. Because there was nothing left to say. Everything they had built their confidence on was now being examined. Not emotionally. Legally. And legal truth doesn't respond to explanation. It responds to evidence. The lawyer gathered the documents neatly. "I'll proceed with a full evaluation," he said. "Until then, no further changes should be made." No further changes. That mattered. Because it meant they couldn't move forward. They couldn't fix anything. They could only wait. And waiting is where certainty begins to fall apart. We stood. Not together. Not in agreement. Just, at the same time. My son hesitated near the door. "Mom," he started. I looked at him. He stopped. Because he didn't know what to say anymore. My daughter-in-law didn't speak at all. She simply walked past him. Controlled. Composed. But not certain. Not anymore. I walked out last. The hallway felt longer than before. Quieter. But clearer. Outside, the air was still. Nothing had changed. Except everything that mattered. They thought they were securing the future. But what they had really done was expose the past. And once the past is examined, it doesn't disappear. It defines everything that comes next. They didn't leave together this time. That was the first thing I noticed. My son stepped outside first, faster than usual, his movements less controlled, less measured. He didn't wait, he didn't look back. My daughter-in-law followed a few seconds later. Slower. More composed. But not the same. Something had shifted between them. Not visibly. Not openly. But enough. I walked to my car without rushing. No reason to hurry now. Everything that needed to move had already started moving. That afternoon, the house felt different again. Not quiet. Not patient. Just settled. Like something had finally been acknowledged, even if no one had said it out loud. I set my keys down and moved into the living room, sitting in the same chair as always. Same position. Same stillness. But the silence now wasn't empty. It was full. Full of everything they had tried to control. And everything that had slipped beyond their reach. The phone didn't ring right away. I didn't expect it to. People don't call when they're certain. They call when they start to understand. It was early evening when it finally came. My son. I let it ring once. Then answered. "Mom," he said. His voice was different. Lower. Careful. "Yes." A pause. Longer than usual. "We need to figure this out," he said. Figure this out. Not fix. Not finish. Figure. "I'm listening," I said. Another pause. "The lawyer said there's a review process," he continued, "that things might not be as straightforward as we thought." Might not be. "Yes," I said. He exhaled quietly. Not frustration. Not anger. Something closer to uncertainty. "We didn't pressure you," he said. "You agreed to everything." Agreed. I didn't respond immediately. Because sometimes silence forces people to hear their own words. "I know what I signed," I said. That wasn't what he expected. Another pause. Longer now. "But if there's anything that needs to be corrected," he added quickly, "we can handle that, we can work through it." Work through it. Together. That word stayed unspoken this time. "I'm sure you'll try," I said. Not harsh. Not cold. Just accurate. He didn't respond right away. Because for the first time, he didn't know how. "We just want things to be fair," he said finally. Fair. I looked out the window. The light was fading. Evening settling in. "Fair is a matter of structure," I said, "not intention." He went quiet. Because that was something he hadn't considered. They had acted on intention. On belief. On assumption. But none of that mattered now. Only structure did. Only what was written. Only what could be proven. "I'll call you tomorrow," he said. Not confident. Not certain. Just continuing. "I'll be here," I replied. We ended the call. I set the phone down and leaned back slightly in my chair. This was the part most people don't expect. They think the moment of exposure is the end. It isn't. It's the beginning. Because once the truth is visible, people start reacting to it. And reactions reveal everything. Later that night, I received another call. Not from my son. From Daniel. "Mrs. Henderson," he said. "Yes. I've completed a deeper review of the trust," he said. I didn't interrupt. "There are multiple triggers already in motion," he continued, "not just one. Multiple. That mattered. They've established a pattern," he said, "consistent behavior over time. Pattern again. Always pattern." "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means," he said carefully, "this isn't a single incident." "No. It wasn't. It's a case," he added. "Case." That word settled differently. Not personal. Not emotional. Defined. Structured. And the outcome? I asked. A pause. Then. If the review confirms what we're seeing, control doesn't just revert. I waited. It locks. Locks. Permanent. I didn't speak. Because I understood what that meant. No adjustments. No second attempts. No way back. They won't be able to regain access, he said quietly. Silence. Not heavy. Not uncertain. Final. What do you need from me? I asked. Nothing more, he said. You've already done what was necessary. Done. Not doing. Done. After the call ended, I didn't move right away. I let the silence return. But it wasn't the same silence as before. This one had weight. Because now, the outcome wasn't a possibility. It was a direction. And they were already moving toward it. Whether they understood it or not. The house was quiet the next morning. Not the same kind of quiet as before. Not waiting. Not uncertain. Just complete. I woke up at the same time. Made my coffee the same way. Opened the curtains and let the light fall across the kitchen table where I had sat for years, through everything. Some things don't need to change. They just need to be understood. The phone didn't ring. Not from my son. Not from my daughter-in-law. And that told me everything I needed to know. People don't call when they still believe they can fix something. They call when they think they can change the outcome. And this was no longer something they could change. I sat down with my coffee and looked out the window. The street was quiet. A car passed. A neighbor walked by, carrying groceries, moving through her day like nothing in the world had shifted. And in a way, nothing had. Except inside this house. Inside this story. Later that afternoon, Daniel called. Mrs. Henderson, he said. Yes. It's done. He didn't need to explain. I didn't need him to. But he did anyway. Carefully. Precisely. The review is complete, he said. All conditions have been met. The pattern is clear. Pattern. The word that had followed us through everything. Control has reverted fully, he continued, and under the terms of the trust, it cannot be reassigned. Cannot. Permanent. I closed my eyes for just a moment. Not out of relief. Not out of emotion. Just acknowledgement. And the beneficiaries? I asked. They remain as originally defined, he said, unchanged. Of course they did. My husband had never made decisions lightly. And them? I asked. A brief pause. They no longer have authority, Daniel said, in any form. No anger. No judgment. Just fact. Thank you, I said. You don't need to thank me, he replied. You did this correctly. Correctly. We ended the call. I set the phone down and sat there for a moment. This was the part most people imagine differently. They think there's a confrontation. A moment of victory. Raised voices. Tears. There wasn't. Because by the time the truth is clear, there's nothing left to argue about. That evening, my son came. Alone. I heard the car. The door. The hesitation before he knocked. I opened it. He looked tired. Not physically. Something deeper than that. Mom, he said. I stepped aside and let him in. We sat in the living room. Same chairs. Same distance. But nothing was the same. I spoke to the lawyer. He said. I assumed you would. A pause. They said, everything's been reversed. Yes. Another pause. Longer this time. And there's nothing we can do, he added. I didn't answer. Because he already knew. He looked down at his hands. For the first time. Really looked. We didn't think, he started. Then stopped. No explanation. No excuse. Just the beginning of understanding. I know, I said. He looked up. Confused. You didn't think you were doing anything wrong, I continued. Silence. You thought you were taking control of something that was already yours. His expression shifted. Not defensiveness. Recognition. But it wasn't, I said. Another pause. I would have helped you, I added quietly, if you had asked. That was the only moment that held weight. Because it was true. He didn't respond. He couldn't. Not because he disagreed. But because he understood. After a while, he stood up. I'm sorry, he said. Not dramatic. Not loud. Just honest. I nodded. Not as forgiveness. Not as rejection. Just acknowledgement. He walked to the door and paused. Then he left. No argument. No resolution. Just an ending. I closed the door gently and stood there for a moment. The house was quiet again. But this time, it didn't feel empty. It felt returned. I walked back into the living room and sat down in my chair. The same one. The one that had seen everything. Outside, the light was fading. Evening settling in. I didn't turn on the lights right away. I just sat there. Because some things don't need to be said out loud. They just need to be understood. They thought they were taking everything from me. But they never realized. I had never lost control. I had just let them believe I did. And in the end, that belief cost them everything that mattered.